those are the words of critics, and I can't always agree with what the critics say, you know. It may be true and it may not be true. What the painter is trying to do, the painter himself is the only one that can know, really.
Edward Hopper painted the stillness of American life better than anyone, from the diners to the gas stations and hotel rooms where nothing seems to happen but everything somehow does. Yet there's one painting that didn't fit into that familiar frame. It was never publicly shown, rarely discussed, and quietly avoided by curators for reasons that were never made official but were widely understood. The work wasn't lost or forgotten, but deliberately kept out of sight. Some said it was too suggestive. Others thought that it was politically inconvenient. Whatever the reason, the painting didn't make it into the textbooks. Now, for the first time, that painting is being shown, and many are curious about this unique piece. Join us as this painting isn't only unveiled, but the mystery surrounding it is also revealed. Edward Hopper's paintings were undoubtedly unique in their own way, garnering attention from enthusiasts over the years. But who was the man behind the art? Let's take a look. The realities of the quiet rebel. Edward Hopper's life was as introspective as his paintings. He was born on July 22, 1882, in the quiet riverside town of Nyack, New York, where the rhythm of the Hudson River shaped much of his imagination. His father, Garrett, was a dry goods merchant with an enduring affection for French culture and a patient, methodical nature. His mother, Elizabeth, possessed a creative temperament and encouraged her son's early artistic curiosity. Together, they raised Edward and his sister Marion in a comfortable but emotionally restrained household, one that valued intellect, civility, and precision. By the age of 10, he was already sketching boats and riverbanks with a discipline far beyond his years. His early drawings of schooners moored in sunlight or small cottages reflected not just skill, but an unusual awareness of space and silence. Even as a child, he seemed to sense that stillness carried its own kind of drama. After graduating from high school, Edward initially pursued naval architecture, drawn to its structural precision and geometry. But the pull of art soon became too strong to ignore. In 1900, he enrolled in the New York School of Art, one of the leading art academies of its day. It was there that he encountered a group of teachers who would shape his philosophy of painting, among them William Merritt Chase, Kenneth Hayes Miller, and most influentially, Robert Henry. Robert was a commanding figure in American art, the leader of the so-called Ashcan School, which urged young artists to abandon romantic ideals and paint life as it was actually lived. He preached that truth mattered more than technique, that an artist's duty was to reveal his own way of seeing. Robert told his students, "Paint what you feel, not what you think you're supposed to see." Edward absorbed the lesson but interpreted it differently from his peers. While others charged into the streets to paint the rough vitality of city life, he turned inward. He was no rebel in the noisy social sense. His defiance was quiet. He wanted to paint the spaces between events, the empty rooms, the long pauses, the silences that never made it into the newspapers. By the time he finished his studies in 1906, Edward had already begun developing his distinctive sense of mood and composition. But like many young American artists, he longed to see Europe. That same year, he boarded a ship to Paris, where he would stay intermittently for several years. In Paris, he lived simply in rented rooms on the left bank, near the cafes and bridges that had lured so many painters before him. He spent his days sketching along the Seine, studying the play of light on the city's facades. Yet, unlike other Americans abroad, he wasn't seduced by the Impressionists' softness or color. He admired them, yes, especially Monet and Pissarro, but he preferred the controlled order of Degas and Courbet, whose work balanced realism with emotional restraint. Paris gave him something subtler in the form of a new way of understanding light. The cool northern glow diffused through windows and mist fascinated him. He began to see how light could define a room as much as any object within it. That revelation would echo through his career. Every diner, every gas station, every empty room illuminated not by narrative, but by illumination itself. He returned to New York in 1909, carrying dozens of sketches and an unshakable sense of direction, yet little recognition. Over the next decade, he would work primarily as a commercial illustrator, producing advertisements and magazine covers to survive. It was a compromise he despised, but endured. The discipline of that commercial work required the precision to capture attention quickly, later influencing his approach to composition, though he called the job a living death. During these lean years, he lived a largely solitary life in Manhattan. His paintings from that period featured deserted rooftops, sunlit interiors, lone figures reading near windows, reflecting both his circumstances and his psychology. He painted slowly, meticulously, never rushing an image until it felt inevitable. By the time he reached his mid-30s, he had sold almost nothing. Yet he continued to paint with the quiet conviction that his perspective mattered. He once remarked, "If I could say it in words, there would be no reason to paint." That belief sustained him when nothing else did. It would take another decade and one pivotal meeting before the still world he painted finally began to move. It's often said that behind every success story is a woman, and in this case, he found a woman who was truly his love and muse. Josephine, the mirror and the catalyst. By the early 1920s, Edward was a man out of step with his time. The art world around him was in a rush as Cubism, Futurism, Dada, and Surrealism movements exploded with color, abstraction, and manifestos. Yet he remained still. He painted the ordinary with reverence, the unspoken with precision, and the empty with presence. The galleries were slow to respond. At nearly 40 years old, he had sold fewer than a dozen paintings. Then, in 1923, everything began to change. That summer, while teaching at the Art Students League and exhibiting small etchings in New York, he reconnected with a fellow artist from his student days, Josephine Versteel Nivison, known to everyone as Jo. She was a painter, teacher, and former actress, vivacious and outspoken, whereas Edward was reticent and restrained. If he was the embodiment of silence, she was its disruption. She had studied at the same New York School of Art under Robert Henri and had already built a modest reputation as a modernist painter. Her work was looser, more emotional, full of color and movement, which was the opposite of his measured restraint. But she recognized in his paintings a kind of emotional truth that few critics yet saw. The two began spending time together that summer in Gloucester, Massachusetts, a small fishing town that attracted artists for its luminous coastal light. Jo convinced Edward to join her in painting outdoors, and it was there that something between them began to spark, not just romantically, but artistically. They painted side by side, often in silence, studying the same houses and harbors from different angles. When Jo was invited later that year to exhibit her work at the Brooklyn Museum, she recommended his paintings as well. The curators agreed, and soon one of his works, The Mansard Roof, was included in the show. It sold almost immediately to the museum. That single sale, facilitated by her, was his first real breakthrough. The following year, in 1924, they married in New York City. Their wedding was modest, their honeymoon spent traveling through New England sketching, painting, and beginning what would become one of the most complex and creatively productive partnerships in American art. Their marriage was famously turbulent but also fiercely interdependent. Jo was not simply Edward's wife, she was his muse, model, critic, secretary, and record keeper. She appeared in nearly all his major works as the central female figure from Automat to Morning Sun to Nighthawks. Her features, the short auburn hair, the reflective gaze, and the slightly tense posture became the visual anchor of his narratives. Still, to see Jo only as a muse is to miss her deeper role. She organized his career, handled correspondence, managed sales, and meticulously documented his process in journals and notebooks. She recorded when he painted, what the light was like, and how long he worked. Thanks to those notes, art historians today can trace the creation of nearly every major Hopper painting. Their life together was a study in opposites being emotional heat and emotional withdrawal, expression and restraint, talk and silence. Her diary entries reveal her frustration at times, especially as her own career faded in the shadow of his growing fame. She had once been an exhibiting artist. After marriage, her creative identity became entangled with his, yet she remained essential to his vision. In the small top-floor apartment they shared at 3 Washington Square North in Greenwich Village, they worked side by side for more than 4 decades. The space became both studio and stage, a laboratory of light and tension. He painted by the window, always chasing the shifting patterns of daylight across the walls. Jo painted at her own easel, sometimes working, sometimes watching him work. Their arguments were frequent, often over trivial things, but the energy of those conflicts somehow fed the art. Each summer they escaped the city for Cape Cod, first renting cottages and later building their own home in Truro in 1934. The house sat on a hill overlooking the dunes and the Atlantic, exposed to both wind and light. There he painted some of his most iconic works: Cape Cod Morning, Rooms by the Sea, and Second-Story Sunlight, all born from the still geometry of that landscape. Jo's influence filled these years. She introduced him to new artistic circles, encouraged him to exhibit more, and pushed him when he retreated into silence. Though their relationship was marked by creative rivalry, it was also one of deep loyalty. When he doubted himself, she reminded him of who he was. When he hesitated to show new work, she made him. The two shared a peculiar rhythm where his need for solitude balanced against her need for connection. Their life became a dialogue between those forces, a dialogue that played out on his canvases. His women, often shown alone in hotel rooms or sunlit interiors, embody both longing and contemplation emotions that seem drawn directly from their shared world. As his fame began to grow through the late 1920s and 30s, she remained both his collaborator and his critic. She could be blunt sometimes, but he valued her honesty even when he resisted it. In her notes, she often described his moods while working as silent all morning, repainted sky, said the light was wrong again. Her voice, sharp and unfiltered, became the unseen counterpoint to his visual quiet. Together they weathered the Great Depression, the Second World War, and the changing tides of the art world. Movements such as surrealism, abstract expressionism, and pop art came and went, yet he remained steadfast to his style. He refused to follow trends, even when critics dismissed his realism as outdated. Jo stood by him through all of it, sometimes resentfully but always faithfully. By the late 1930s, she had become one of the defining American painters of his generation. Exhibitions at the Whitney Museum and the Museum of Modern Art cemented his reputation as the chronicler of modern solitude. Jo, though often uncredited, was there at every stage, making notes, posing, framing, observing. Their marriage was not harmonious, but it was symbiotic. Each needed the other's contrast, his quiet to her noise, his order to her chaos, and within that tension lay the creative electricity that produced the work we now consider timeless. The world he could see wasn't peaceful, it was unsettled, humming with tension, and waiting for something unnamed to happen. His dislike for modernism and abstraction wasn't all that defined him because, strictly speaking, he wasn't a traditionalist either. His realism was psychological and even subversive. He used familiar American scenery like the lunch counter, the movie theater, and the apartment window to expose isolation, alienation, and the quiet ache of modern existence. Critics of his day saw him as a chronicler of everyday America. What they often missed was that his paintings carried a muted form of rebellion. He resisted the optimism that dominated post-war art, ignoring the glossy narratives of progress and suburban comfort that filled magazines and advertisements. His America was emotionally cold, structurally divided, and haunted by the loneliness of modern life. At a time when the art world was shifting toward the abstract, like Pollock's splatters or Rothko's color fields, Edward Hopper stood apart. He refused to follow fashion or theory. To curators and critics who prized novelty, he seemed almost anachronistic, and to viewers he was unsettlingly honest. His art was simple in form but radical in feeling. This tension between the safe image of the realist painter and the discomfort that his best works evoke is key to understanding why one particular painting might have finally been too much. The same qualities that made him a household name also made him dangerous in the right or wrong context. The hidden painting, long kept away from public eyes, may not contradict Hopper's vision at all. It may instead reveal just how far he was willing to go when he stopped censoring himself. Now the question probably forming is, could simply choosing not to conform have made his painting so offensive? At first glance, the idea seems absurd. Edward Hopper, the quiet chronicler of small-town melancholy and urban isolation, hardly seems like the kind of artist who would cause outrage. His canvases weren't usually defined as the type to shout, they whispered. His subjects rarely even look at the viewer. Yet for all their restraint, his paintings have always carried a ticking time bomb of unease waiting to explode, a tension that made even the simplest images feel charged with ambiguity. It isn't hard to imagine how, in the right or perhaps wrong context, one painting could have crossed an invisible line. He often painted women in private moments, the kind where they could have been sitting by a window, undressing, or lost in thought. His work, Morning Sun, 1952 for example, shows a woman perched on a bed in nothing but a slip, bathed in light but utterly alone. Though tasteful by modern standards, such intimacy once skirted the edge of propriety. His wife Jo, who modeled for nearly all of these figures, recorded that he often wanted to explore the human figure in its truth, not its politeness. That phrase, "not its politeness," hinted at something deeper than just casual art or observation. In an era still defined by Victorian hangovers and moral conservatism, even quiet sensuality could be labeled indecent. A painting that pushed further by suggesting eroticism, or worse, emotional intimacy between socially taboo partners, might easily have been deemed unfit for public display. Edward was no propagandist, but he wasn't apolitical either. His art was born of skepticism toward modern America and its hurried optimism, its commercial gleam, and its spiritual vacancy. In the 1930s and 40s, when federal art programs encouraged patriotic depictions of American life, his work stood apart for its cold, detached, sometimes uncomfortably honest views. If the lost painting contained even a hint of social critique showing poverty, racial inequality, or post-war disillusionment, curators might have viewed it as a political risk. His silence was his weapon. His refusal to flatter America could easily be mistaken for subversion. A painting that made that critique more explicit could have been quietly shelved to protect both reputation and funding. His greatest gift was his ability to reveal emotional distance within intimacy. His couples don't argue, but their silence is deafening. In Room in New York, made in 1932, a man reads his newspaper while a woman idly touches piano keys, both trapped in a moment of quiet disconnection. If a lost painting amplified that disconnection by showing anger, despair, or even psychological breakdown, it might have felt too raw for mid-century audiences accustomed to the composure of realism. Museums and galleries of the time preferred him as the poet of solitude, not its victim. To present him as more emotionally explicit, a man confronting the darkness beneath domestic life would have risked reshaping his entire image. There is also the possibility that the work touched a subject no one wanted to name. Interracial relationships, same-sex intimacy, or hints of violence all could have triggered censorship in the cultural climate of the time. His realism was too clear-eyed to disguise such things behind abstraction. If he painted a scene that depicted a forbidden relationship or moral transgression in his usual direct, unsentimental way, curators might have seen it as too difficult to explain. While not much is known about that, the depths of one of his most acclaimed works deserve to be talked about: The Brilliance of Nighthawk. To look at Nighthawks, painted by Edward Hopper in 1942, is to step into a silence so complete it almost hums. Few paintings in art history place the viewer inside quite the way this one does. Through the wide glass of a corner diner, three customers are seen suspended in a moment that feels both familiar and unreachable. The viewers stand outside in the chill of the night, drawn to the glow of the fluorescent interior, but kept at a distance by the wall of glass. Edward doesn't even give viewers a door to enter, as they are meant to look, not to join. The diner's bareness adds to the feeling of isolation. Empty stools stretch toward the frame, suggesting it's well past midnight, the hour when the street's empty and the lights in the nearby apartments go dark. Inside, the yellow light has the warmth of moonlight, which is soft, artificial, and strangely comforting, spilling out across the pavement that no one walks. At the counter, a man and a woman sit close but not connected. They are necessary Hopper figures, together yet emotionally apart, caught in some silent crossroad we can't fully interpret. The man's unlit cigarette and the woman's fixed gaze on a book of matches suggest something unsaid between them, a gesture waiting to happen, a decision yet to be made. Their hands nearly touch but don't. That sliver of space between them holds all the tension of the scene. Behind the counter, the diner worker bends to his task, his motion breaking the stillness just enough to remind us that life continues, even in quiet. His presence animates the composition without disturbing its mood. And then there's the fourth figure, the man with his back to the viewers, sitting alone at the far end of the counter. He's the anonymous observer within the painting, the city's everyman, the passerby who's found temporary refuge from the night. Edward's genius lies in what he withholds. Nighthawks offers no story, only atmosphere, and the suggestion that something has just ended, or that something else might begin. Every line and light feels deliberate, from the curve of the counter to the angle of the shadows. The stillness becomes a kind of narrative in itself, one where loneliness, intimacy, and waiting coexist under the steady hum of fluorescent light. In Nighthawks, he didn't just paint a late-night diner, he painted the architecture of solitude, the moment when the city pauses to listen to its own heartbeat. For me, the true power of Nighthawks lies in its refusal to resolve. Every gesture, every line of sight, every pool of light seems to hint at a story whose ending will never be known. The painting lives in what art historian Walter Wells once called the impossibility of denouement. He doesn't just withhold resolution. He makes that withholding the very subject of the work. When you pull back and take in the entire scene, its pristine quality becomes striking. The diner gleams. The streets are immaculate, unsullied by litter or wear, as if the city itself has been paused in time. There's no grime, no graffiti, no trace of human clutter. Every building holds its line, every window is sharply defined. The orderliness feels deliberate and almost oppressive in its perfection, as though he wanted to strip the city of its noise and leave only geometry and light. Perspective plays a crucial role in that precision. The diner's glass facade stretches across 2/3 of the canvas, anchored by a vanishing point that falls far to the left, pulling in the gaze into an invisible horizon. This structure gives the scene its quiet tension. The heads of the three main figures fall exactly at the midpoint of the composition, an equilibrium that both stabilizes and isolates them. His control is mathematical, but what he measures is loneliness. Then there's the light. He was always a painter of light. Sunlight across a wall, morning shadows through half-drawn blinds, the soft radiance that transforms an empty room into a stage. Different from usual, in Nighthawks the light is no longer natural. It's artificial, fluorescent, the new light of modern America in the 1940s, unfeeling, perpetual, almost clinical. A keen observation reveals how that light defines the painting's mood. Inside the diner, the yellow glow slices across the counter in sharp angular planes, its geometry so precise it feels like a weapon, a blade of brightness cutting through the darkness. Outside, the glow softens, curving across the pavement in muted greens and grays. It's as if the light itself is trying to escape, seeping through the glass toward the observer, yet never quite reaching. His layering of paint captures that subtle shift perfectly, the translucent wash of artificial light dissolving into the night air. Those greenish ribbons across the street floor remind us of the window pane between us and them, the barrier that defines every Hopper scene. In Nighthawks, the diner becomes both refuge and prison, a place where the fluorescent hum replaces conversation, and where the silence, illuminated so beautifully, becomes its own kind of language. The fame of works like this only served to grow curiosity in the mysterious paintings, and when Edward Hopper died, many thought the time had come to unveil this hidden mystery. The Hoppers' estate and the Whitney controversy. When Edward Hopper died in 1967 at the age of 84, he left behind one of the most quietly powerful bodies of work in American art and one of the most complicated estates. His widow, Josephine Hopper, outlived him by less than a year, and in that brief time she became both guardian and victim of his legacy. It was Jo who had modeled for nearly every woman he painted, Jo who recorded his working habits, and Jo who ensured that his paintings reached the museums that first gave him recognition. Yet in the months after his death, her health deteriorated, and the decisions about his artistic estate fell into the hands of others, most notably the Whitney Museum of American Art. Jo bequeathed the couple's entire artistic estate and roughly 3,000 works, including paintings, sketches, and personal documents to the Whitney, which had long been Edward's institutional home. The museum had supported his career early on, mounting his first major retrospective in 1933 and remaining a steady patron for decades. But the transfer of the Hopper estate was chaotic. Her will was executed hastily and the records were incomplete. The Whitney, despite its prestige, was unprepared for the sheer volume of material that arrived. Among the works were hundreds of oil sketches, watercolors, and half-finished canvases. Some pieces were unlabeled, others unsigned. Several works were stored in the couple's Washington Square apartment, where they were stacked, rolled, or placed in drawers. In the confusion, mistakes were inevitable. But as later research revealed, the mishandling of his estate went beyond disorder. In the 1970s, a Baptist minister named Arthur R. Sanborn became a central and controversial figure in the Hopper scholarship. He had befriended the elderly couple and had been entrusted with helping catalog and store their belongings. After Jo's death, he retained hundreds of items that technically belonged to the Whitney, including personal letters, notebooks, and even paintings. Many of these materials remained in his possession for decades, out of public view, and were later sold or loaned without clear documentation. It was only in the early 2000s that art historians began to grasp the scale of what had happened. Gail Levin, the leading Hopper scholar and author of Edward Hopper: An Intimate Biography, accused him of withholding and profiting from property that rightfully belonged to the Hopper estate. She argued that the loss of those materials distorted the historical record, leaving unanswered questions about Edward Hopper's working process and perhaps about specific paintings that vanished from view after his death. The Whitney, for its part, maintained a cautious silence. It eventually recovered some of the works, but others remained unaccounted for. The museum's handling of the estate, once seen as an act of stewardship, came to symbolize the quiet ways in which institutions control an artist's legacy, deciding what to show, what to store, and what to forget. Within that tangled history lies the most tantalizing question of whether the offensive or missing Hopper painting could have been among those withheld, misplaced, or misfiled. The possibility is not far-fetched, as during early cataloging, curators noted several unidentified canvases, some unfinished or unfamiliar works that were either destroyed or locked away for further review. Some were never logged properly, while others disappeared from the record. The controversy around Hopper's estate reveals the uncomfortable truth that artistic legacy is never purely artistic, it's institutional. Once an artist dies, their work becomes property, their reputation a brand. The curators, archivists, and scholars who handle it wield enormous influence over what future generations will see. For decades, the Whitney's narrative of Hopper was tidy and linear. He was the painter of loneliness, of American quietude, of cinematic stillness. If even one painting contradicted that story by showing rage, sensuality, or despair, it would demand a rewrite of everything we thought we knew about him. And so, for nearly half a century, no one asked too loudly what might still lie unshown in the archives. Now, As Edward Hopper's long career is re-examined through fresh eyes and recovered works, the possibility of a hidden Hopper painting feels not only plausible, but almost inevitable. What do you think of his life and unique insights into life and art? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. To enjoy more exciting videos, click play on the video on your screen. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you get notified when a new video drops.